What's up, everybody? Welcome into the 615 podcast. It's your host, Lee Hills. Today, you see, we're talking Titans, Commanders. And of course, you see the score right there. Titans take down the Commanders. Actually, not they didn't take down. They escaped the Commanders on a last-second interception by David Long. And our guest is Kris Freeman. And we'll be back with Kris Freeman here in about 2.5 minutes.
Tennessee Titans season's over. Let's call it what it is.
Running the ball now.
Tucker by low and loses the ball. It's Titans ball. And to Hilliard, he's got room. 30, 20, 10, 5, it's zone.
Go win the Super Bowl for this entire season.
Take a deep breath. Okay, have some fun. Be poised in the thing. You're gonna make mistakes. Every one of you is gonna make a mistake. Go figure out a way to make it right.
Wherever you listen throughout the world, it's football time in Tennessee.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. And of course, let's just go ahead and bring our guest in, Kris Freeman. Kris, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
And of course, this man wears so many hats, it's not funny.
Well, right now I've got the MTSU one on. We play Western Kentucky on homecoming, but you're correct. My closet has a lot of hats and polos from different places, and I'm really excited to be able to represent so many different organizations and have the opportunity to do some pretty cool things.
So you do, you're the public address announcer for MTSU football.
Correct, for football.
And then men's and women's basketball and lacrosse for Vandy.
That's correct, yes. And so been at Vanderbilt since 2015. MTSU, this is my first year with MTSU football. And then I also work with the TSSAA championships for basketball and football, and sometimes baseball as a fill-in. And then Liberty Creek High School for play-by-play on Friday night. So it's a lot of different cool things. And when I'm not announcing, I get to be a photographer, and I have a media business. That's what I do to make a little bit of money and support my family.
And of course, so let's just go ahead and dive into this. Of course, some breaking news coming out of the NFL: Davante Adams charged with misdemeanor assault after shoving a photographer after Monday night.
So on Monday night, I got to see the end of the game, and I saw Scott Van Pelt on SportsCenter. He actually was showing the live walk-off of the field when I saw this happen. And you could tell right then that this was going to be probably something that was going to be talked about later, but I think it caught everybody by surprise. And, I've been a teacher, a high school teacher, and worked with a lot of high school and college age photographers. And, having media access and knowing where you're supposed to be is really, really important. So I understand Davante Adams, position that somebody walked in front of him and was right in front of the tunnel and where they shouldn't be. But the other side of that is how many other people did Davante Adams walk around before he got to the tunnel? So it's hard to make an argument that he just shoved this one guy because he got in his way, because you could really say that about the hundreds, if not thousands of people that pile into the football field after a game is over with. And these players, unfortunately, have to navigate their way and work around that going to the locker room. And when you have a walk-off loss like that, you know that he's upset. And so I feel for both sides. I'm not surprised that, a lawsuit comes from this, because that's just typically the way it works in our world today. But if a player is going to get suspended, like Mike Evans for pushing another player, if a player is going to get fined and suspended for touching a referee, then you would almost expect that there's going to be some kind of suspension and fine coming down for Adams, even if this was a photographer and a team personnel.
And then, of course, the other huge story out of the NFL, Matt Rule is out as Panthers head coach. He of course, you see the stat there. He was 11-27 during his 3 years in Carolina.
Well, I think this is really interesting timing by Carolina, because the trade deadline looms and they've struggled out the gate. And they know if they're going to make moves, then this sets them up to be able to do that and really opens the door for other teams to take a look. You've already seen Christian McCaffrey's name, be mentioned in some places, like for the Rams and
Buffalo.
for the Bills. I think Buffalo's the obvious choice there, looking for a running back, and they're an elite team. And if they shore that up, that would be a huge acquisition for them. But as far as the Panthers are concerned, I think the thing you just got to consider is that maybe at the end of the day, it's not a shame to say that some college coaches just aren't successful in the National Football League. And it doesn't make them a bad coach. It's just a hard fit. And this is one of those cases, 11-27 overall. And I would say within a year, he'll be back in the college ranks and probably picking up one of these college jobs that have already opened up throughout the course of the season.
And talking about college coaches that have had a hard time transitioning, Nick Saban back in the early 2000s with Miami.
Who would have ever believed that some of the people that you're talking about are some of the most successful college coaches that we've ever seen? Like Nick Saban. Urban Meyer has his own set of problems in the NFL, but he's been really successful in the college ranks. And now you've got Matt Rule, who was great at Baylor, and even in his stops before there was a really successful college head coach. And I think the first transition point that you're going to see mentioned is going to Auburn, where Brian Harsin is certainly on the hot seat for the Tigers, and was on the hot seat before the season ever started with all of the controversy there in Auburn. And if they don't finish well, and even if they do, I think it's a pretty good chance that that's going to be one of the places where you're going to see his name matched up. But you got all kinds of other openings. Nebraska has an interim. Yeah, Nebraska has an interim, and they're looking for a big time move, and that would be a Big 12, style program. Even though they're in the Big 10, that would be a Big 12 style program where he's been in the past.
And of course, the Titans. Let's transition to the Titans side of this. With Matt Rule being out, if you're John Robinson, do you look at a guy like a DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson?
Well, I think DJ Moore is certainly the one that's the hot topic of conversation right now, but you have to make the pitch. The Titans have not been afraid to trade draft picks. They've not been afraid to make moves and acquisitions. And I think you just have to consider what the situation is for the Titans and where their weaknesses are. And DJ Moore is the certain fit that fills one of those weak spots. And so I think that the conversation has to be had. You got to consider there's a lot of other teams in the NFL who are going to make that same offer. Will Carolina work with Tennessee? I think that's two teams that traditionally you haven't seen a lot of cooperation between those two teams. And it's no reason why. It's just we don't associate the Panthers and the Titans very often in a situation like this. And so I'm going to be really, interested to see, especially with the bye week, what's going to happen as Tennessee has some time to sit back and think about this, maybe put a package together, contact the Panthers and see what their options are. And if you're the Panthers, you got to think about unloading and getting whatever that you can to prepare yourself for the future for what is certain to be a little bit of a rebuild.
And of course, I put a poll out on Twitter. I put 3 names in there: Robbie Anderson, Brian Burns, and Derek Brown. And Derek Brown in that defensive front with Big Jeff would be terrifying.
Well, and I think the first thing that you're going to see is, Robbie Anderson is kind of an either or. I think if you're going to make a move for DJ Moore, then, it's one of those fallback options, for if you don't get DJ Moore, then you look at Robbie Anderson. If you look at the defensive line for the Titans, the argument is that is a place where the Titans have been pretty strong compared to some other spots on the field. And so I don't want to say waste a trade because I don't think it's a waste, but would you make that trade and use your picks when there are other areas of significant need that it does boost your defensive line, but the Titans are doing pretty well at times up front, especially on third down, especially in, short yardage and goal line situations. Where they need help is in the defensive secondary and certainly at wide receiver and on the offensive line for certain.
Well, if you were to look at a guy like Brian Burns, young guy, he's 25. He can play inside linebacker because there is the inside linebacker room right now is very thin for Tennessee.
Well, and I think that's one of the places with the injuries that are piling up. What is it? We're at 64 players already for the Titans
69.
This year, 69. So, we're already starting to creep up to the numbers that we saw last year, and it feels like the injuries are piling up quicker. So I think that you certainly have to look at depth. I would say up front, the Titans are in a stronger position than they are at linebacker and at defensive back. And so, the thing you got to remember is the Panthers aren't going to haul their whole set of available players to Tennessee. So you have to look across that list of available players and say, who is the most reasonable target for us and what are we willing to spend to be able to get him here? And I think 1, maybe 2 is the absolute most that you could get. If you don't get anybody, there's going to be a lot of people looking around and saying, is Tennessee willing to improve some obvious weaknesses? And the fear is with the number of free agents that they've brought in that have been disappointments or didn't work out or have battled injuries, there's always that fear that something doesn't work again. And enough of those pile up and people start to question that process.
And of course, there's one other news topic that I forgot to put in here. Theo Jackson is now a Minnesota Viking.
Well, and you're looking at Theo Jackson, and my son's walking into the room and holding up a picture of Odell Beckham. So he's trying to insert that into the conversation. But my son's a Seahawks fan. They've got their own set of problems that they need to work out. They're not exactly breaking it either, and I think they got problems in the backfield with injuries as well. So Theo Jackson now with the Minnesota Vikings, and I think when you start looking at the Titans having the problems that they do, people are starting to look back and say, why did we let certain people go and keep the ones that we did? And I'm sure before it's over, we'll get into some of the issues with the defensive backs and safeties, but that's a pretty good move for the Vikings. They're building some depth. I don't know if the Vikings are that good or if the division that they are in is pretty bad. And it may be a little bit of both right now, but the Vikings are off to a pretty hot start. And I would say that's a pretty good landing spot for Theo Jackson.
And so let's transition this show over to Titans and the Commanders recap. And let's go ahead and look at the analytics from the Titans standpoint by player. Let's start with Ryan Tannehill. He was 15 of 25, 181 yards and a touchdown. For me, that's a solid game for Ryan.
Well, I think that he did early what you want him to do, but he's done that seemingly almost every single game, including the Buffalo game. Let's don't forget, we got blown out against Buffalo, but in the first few minutes of that game, everything seemed fine. and then it just got away from us. We couldn't catch up, and that one just really turned into a blowout. But he continues to do the things early and do the things well that you need to do. The question is, why are we not seeing more plays of 20 yards downfield? And through 5 games, I think we're at something like 16 of those, and not very many plays of 20 yards plus at all. And then secondly, are there play calling and formation and issues with Tannehill, offensive coordinator, where somebody's just not on the same page? Because the Titans go from a very efficient offense to really out of sync really quickly, and nobody yet has been able to figure that out. But the one thing that I know about Mike Vrabel is that Mike Vrabel is a defensive-minded coach. And whether you come out of the Patriots or Bears or Ravens' old system of winning with defense and field goals, the more he wins in these close games, when it's on the line late and they pull it through, the more it gives fuel to the fire that we need to keep doing what we're doing. And I think fans want to see that lead continue to grow and build a lead early in the game. But a defensive-minded coach says we did what we needed to do, no matter how much of a heartache it was for the fans to watch. We ultimately got the win, and here we are with a 3-game winning streak, setting at 3-2 and back on top of the division.
And then, of course, Derrick Henry being Derrick Henry, like we expect him to do right out the gate.
He ran really well on Sunday. I never saw the actual stat to find out how many yards he would have had without the penalties. And it felt like somewhere around the second quarter that every time he touched the football, there was a penalty flag thrown and he was losing big chunks. But he still ended up with 102 yards, 28 carries, 2 touchdowns, but he was running with a purpose on Sunday. And if you could look at Derrick Henry on Sunday and see him from the last few games, there was a little bit of that gear that we've seen from prior to his injury, where he was running. And, everybody likes to call him Tractor Cito and bring up the whole tractor nickname, but that's what he looked like on Sunday. He looked like somebody that was full steam ahead, ready to hit the line. I really don't think it was a matter of how well anybody blocked. He was hitting the first hole really quickly, and once he got to contact, he was driving the pile. And when Derrick Henry is at his best, first contact doesn't make any difference to him whatsoever, because he drives forward for 3, 4, 5, and then ultimately starts to break it. We are probably 1 or 2 weeks away from seeing one of the big runs by Derrick Henry be broken. I think everybody's just waiting for it to happen, and it's going to come really soon.
And of course, NWI, what a catch the young man had.
That was probably one of the biggest plays of the game, without a doubt.
62-yard catch.
And that set up the go-ahead touchdown, if I'm right. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, when NWI gets the big catch, sets up the go-ahead touchdown, and I want to give the Titans credit. All season long we've been ahead and trying to hold off the other team from coming back. For the first time, the Commanders took a lead, and the Titans had to make a second-half rally. Now, after they got the lead again, certainly we're back to the same conversation. But getting back ahead of the game, that was certainly a huge play. And what Titans fans want to see more of out of Ryan Tannehill is, as he continues, I think he's really close to 1,000 yards now for the season. So he's in the middle of the pack as far as the NFL is concerned, with yardage. But we're not expecting him to lead the league. We're not expecting him to be one of the top elite passers. What they want out of Ryan Tannehill is to take care of the football. Don't turn it over, take care of the football, and be able to efficiently move the offense and give us that occasional big play. And I think that's a big play to NWI that we want to see more of as the season goes forward.
And then, of course, we have to talk defensively.
In my opinion, Danico Autry is probably the unsung hero. There's 3 or 4 of them. I know on your list here, one that's not mentioned, and if I'm jumping ahead and talking about somebody, forgive me if I do that, but not only Autry, but Teair Tart, dropping into coverage on the play before David Long makes the interception, and I was listening to an interview with David Long yesterday, and basically he said that, Tart walks around the locker room bragging on the fact that he is leading the team in pass breakups. Now, I don't know if that's a credit. I don't know if that's a credit to Tart or a discredit to the Titans secondary, But nonetheless, it was a fantastic play that he made. But Autry is one of those guys that's making Simmons even better. And when you put them working together, it's just an outstanding work up front by the Tennessee Titans. They're getting great pressure on the quarterback. I love what we're doing up front. I don't like it when we back off. And I felt like on that last drive, when you got secondary issues, they're not wanting to give up that big play like they did with the huge touchdown. And they don't want the Commanders to throw it deep. And certainly Carson Wentz can. And so they get down to the goal line, but they basically played that type of defense the entire series. And before you know it, it's 1st and goal and the game's on the line. And I felt like that the Commanders did a good job of just dinking and dunking underneath and putting the ball in the hands 8 to 10 yards down the field and taking what they could get. And I think the pass rush sort of backed off, and that's an end of the game philosophy that a lot of coaches are not willing to take that risk. But it didn't seem like that the Titans got the defensive pressure on Carson Wentz that they had earlier in the game on that last drive.
And then, of course, you mentioned Jeffrey Simmons. Both him and Danico together, I would hate to face them on a good day.
If the Titans ever fix the secondary, this is going to be probably the best, arguably one of the best. It's already one of the best defensive fronts in football, but it's going to rival, being the best in the league. And here's why. Because right now they're having to do this with a secondary that seemingly can't get the stop that it needs to get. So all of a sudden, imagine when coverage sacks are going to start to come. When sacks come because the defense is doing its job in the zone or in the secondary, and suddenly these guys can just tee off on the quarterback, although you can't hardly touch a quarterback right now without getting a penalty flag. And we got one of those on Sunday too. That was a little bit questionable. But right now up front, these, and what if you're the Colts? I mean, if you're the Colts, you got to be kicking yourself watching this with Autry playing the way that he is.
And then, of course, look at David Long. David Long had a game.
Well, everybody forgets that he had, 11 tackles before the interception. So a heck of a game long before it ever got there. The most impressive thing that he did on that final play, it wasn't just diving for the interception, because if he doesn't pick the ball off, they're going to get another play. They're going to get 6 seconds with a chance to snap it one more time. So the fact that he held on to the ball was amazing enough. But it was the shoulder check to the inside receiver that put him in position, almost pinballed him into the spot where he was able to make the interception, but he effectively took the other receiver out of the play. And just an outstanding smart play. And he actually said in the interview that they were watching the keys. They knew what might be coming. And the play before with T.R. Tart dropping into coverage gave them a clue of what the Commanders might do and try to throw it underneath. And really, it was interesting that they never really tried to take that shot at a fade or a corner or anything like that.
And then, of course, let's head to the Commanders' side of this whole game. Carson Wentz had a huge game through the air. Another 350-plus yard game given up by this Titans secondary.
Until the last pass, that was probably one of his better games in a really, really long time. And I really hate what happened with his head coach in the comments after the game. I don't think that Ron Rivera meant that as a shot toward Carson Wentz. But the way that he framed the answer to the question, it certainly sounded that way. And if you don't know what we're talking about, Rivera was asked after the game, what is the difference between his team at the bottom of the division and the other 3 teams, which are 3 of the best in football, in the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Eagles, and their record? And he said 2 words: quarterback play. And immediately, your quarterback just threw an interception on the final play of the game. And how does that look to your quarterback who threw for this kind of yardage and had such a game? And now a guy that has in his career struggled with making huge mistakes in the wrong times. And now you got your head coach going and saying that quarterback play separates you from the rest of the division. He tried to clarify it. But if you're Carson Wentz, you got to wonder what kind of trust that Ron Rivera and the coaching staff has in him going forward. They're struggling really, really bad. And if you're Wentz, everybody expects him to make that mistake. But up until that time, I got to be honest, I thought they were going to win the ball game, and I thought he played really well.
And of course, there was one guy in this draft class that I was really high on, and it was De'Ami Brown.
Well, his separation on that play was just fantastic. And, I think, 75 yards, I believe, on that, the one pass play. And, that's just a case. Yeah, the one for a touchdown. And, it's a case where, Kevin Byard is not able to get there and make any help. And, the Titans are just seeing teams pick on Caleb Farley a little bit when he's in the game. And as much as you can say about Caleb Farley, you have to give the credit to Brown, because Brown's the one that made the play and Wentz is the one that made the throw. He's got outstanding speed. He had a really good game on Sunday, and they've got certainly a budding superstar at wide receiver. And I agree with you. He is certainly under the radar, but if the team doesn't get any more wins, then maybe he's not going to get the credit that he deserves as the season goes forward.
And then defensively, Cole Holcomb.
Guy was everywhere.
Exactly. He's the kind of guy that you want as your inside linebacker.
Well, he kind of reminds you of the old, the old 1990s linebacker look with the long hair and, the
mullet, sort of.
Yeah, the mullet, and, kind of has he just has that typical just hard-nosed, really good tackler, really good leader, linebacker mentality. But I think the thing that you have to look at his tackles is he was not only making key tackles, he was also willing to meet up with Derrick Henry in the middle of the field. And if you're going to take on Derrick Henry the way he did, and, there was a couple times that he pulled him down from behind, those were big key stops and just a fabulous defensive game for the Commanders. I have to worry about saying the Redskins every time I speak about Commanders. I have to catch myself every time I do it. But a fabulous game for Cole Holcomb as a linebacker for the Commanders on Sunday.
And you were talking about like a very effective run-stopping linebacker. There's another guy that you can mention, like Ray Lewis.
Well, and, I think there are so many – linebacker is such an interesting position because it all depends on your team's defensive philosophy, what you're expecting out of your linebacker. Do you expect your linebacker to drop into coverage and to be very effective in the passing game? Do you expect your linebacker to be an outside rusher and go after the quarterback? Or do you need that run-stopping linebacker? And sometimes gone are the days of those middle linebackers that seemingly could do it all, that could do exactly what their coach asked them to do and captain the defense. And now we've got, specialized defenses with the 3-4 and the 4-3, where linebackers are being asked a lot of times to do like slash defensive end type roles. And so it's really interesting team personnel wise. And I think the Titans on the flip side of the ball do a really good job of using their linebackers effectively when they've got such a good presence with Simmons and other guys up front.
And of course, you cannot mention this defense without mentioning Montez Sweat.
I love his name too. That's one of the best names. And Sweat is just Sweat's a big dude. You can see it in that picture right there. And I don't believe the Commanders are a bad defensive football team at all. And in fact, I believe that's going to keep them in a lot of ball games. And when you look at their division's not going to score a ton of points. Maybe the Eagles are the exception there. But the Cowboys and the Giants are not going to score a ton of points, and they're going to be in a lot of ball games. They got to figure out a way to complement their defense and continue to get over the top and get some wins. And I think that was a really kind of a crutch point for both of these teams on Sunday, going different directions. If that game turns out just the opposite, then think about the conversation that we're having right now with the Commanders staying pace in their division and the Titans trying to figure out if they're going to be a playoff contender or not. And now it's just the opposite. The Titans look like they're going to be in control in the AFC South, and the Commanders, even with a decent defense and even playing as well as they have in some parts of games, they still weren't able to come out on top. And now they're facing the cellar in the NFC East. And that's a hard division to play catch up in.
And of course, this division, the AFC South, every team's within at least 1 or 2 games of each other.
I don't think Mike Vrabel likes this situation of playing the Colts early. He mentioned on one of his press conferences the other day that they've been caught in this scheduling quirk where they play the Colts 2 times close together. And it seemed like we got them at the end of the year, and now it's flipped.
Once at the beginning, once at the end.
Yeah, and it seemed like we always finished, with sort of the Texans, Colts, and Jaguars, and now they've got the schedule really out of balance. And it's kind of weird that, we seem to get the Jaguars twice late and we get the Colts twice early. Now, on the other hand, if you win both of those games, you do what the Titans did to the Colts last year. You put them behind the 8 ball and you make them play catch up. And the Colts got all the love from everybody last year, but they never could catch up.
And the next 2 games are division games. You've got Indianapolis coming. You've got Indy coming out of the bye week, and then right behind them, you have Houston.
You win these next 2 games, and you're in the driver's seat. And I think the thing you got to remember about Jacksonville is Jacksonville's one of those shiny new toys this year that everybody fell in love with them a couple of games, but really quickly, you saw on Sunday what they can be when they lose to Houston in another one of those slugfest, awful field goal games that was 6-6 in the fourth quarter. I think the thing you hope if you're the Titans is by the time you get to the Jaguars near the end of the season, that they've eliminated themselves from the race and you can lock up this division and then start talking about positioning for playoffs rather than trying to clinch the division.
And of course, we're coming to the back end of the show. And I said, if time permitted, we would actually talk to you about how you got into play-by-play.
So I got into my first venture into this out of high school was my first year out of high school. I started working as a newspaper reporter. And so I was doing print journalism, covering football games, high school football. And I was also doing play-by-play for Vol State baseball in Gallatin, and junior college baseball is really big in this area of the country and in the South. And at the time, Vol State baseball had the #1 junior college program in the country with head coach Kenny Thomas. They had been to the Junior College World Series. And so I started doing play-by-play with Vol State. And it was interesting because my current wife of 24 years, Jennifer, was the station manager there. And she was also an 80s rock DJ on like a Tuesday morning radio show. And so I used to go over and pick my equipment up every day and go to the field and do play-by-play. And when I sat down in front of the mic for the very first time, a lot of people asked me, like, how do you know how to do this? And I really didn't know how to answer that question, except to say that, you can see behind me that I'm a big Cardinals fan and I love collecting memorabilia and things like that. I started listening to Jack Buck on KMOX at 1120 out of St. Louis when I was, as young as like 7 years old, because you could hear that on AM radio right here in Nashville at night. And that's how I followed Cardinals games. I would turn it on in the house or in the bedroom, or if we were traveling somewhere in the car, and I would always hear Jack Buck, and I began to mimic his calls. And, I can remember growing up, at 10 years old, being able to say, you're listening to the voice of St. Louis, KMOX 1120. And I knew those call signs and those tags and the bumpers for every show as a kid, because that's what I grew up wanting to do. And then when I got out of school and started doing play-by-play, my life sort of took a different journey, and I got into ministry and being a teacher, and I don't regret any of those things. I loved every bit of it, but I did media kind of on the side and just worked for my local high school. And in 2015, I got an opportunity to audition for the PA position at Vanderbilt basketball. And up until that time, I had only done high school PA announcing and, high school and a little bit of junior college play-by-play. So my world kind of flipped upside down. And after a few years of trying to do everything, ministry and teaching and media and sports, I really had to say, my daughter's going to college. My son's about to do the same thing. I got to narrow this down and do something that will allow me to control my own time. And so now I have my own media company and I control my own schedule. And I'm having a great time. I love it. I love being able to go different places and work with different schools. And I certainly miss my students and being in the classroom, but it's pretty cool to see some of them still working in media and doing a lot of things like that too.
Well, I know this was quick, but Kris, thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday to do this.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate you having me on. And, I love talking about the Titans and what's going on here. I'm not I'm not real active on Twitter as far as giving commentary about the game. One of the things that's very important when you're in some of the positions that I am. Not every media member feels like this, but I feel like I have a responsibility to represent the teams that I'm a part of, and always make sure that I do that with class and professionalism. And I'll give some opinions on Cardinal baseball every now and then because that's what I love. But other than that, like I don't spend too much time analyzing the games out loud. Maybe at home I will, or talking about that on Twitter. But it's cool to be able to get on here and talk about those things a little bit. And I feel like the Titans are in a real good position in what is a weak division to set themselves up for a playoff run, get everybody healthy, and put themselves in a position to be successful for the rest of the year. And I hope that that's something that they'll do. And, maybe we can see one of these trades come out with the Panthers with some of the guys that you mentioned, or maybe some other pieces from teams that are struggling around the league can fill a couple of holes for the Titans and really shore up some of their issues.
And then, of course, if anybody wants to get him on, there's his Twitter at Kris Freeman PA. And there's one other thing I've got to ask you about. So you auditioned to be the Titans public address announcer. What
That's
was
correct.
that like?
Pretty amazing. And so I was in the classroom. Actually, we were normally in the classroom. I didn't have a lot of time to do media stuff during the day, but I was actually proctoring a practice ACT test as a high school teacher. And so the kids in the classroom were sitting and being quiet, and we were near the end of the test, and everybody was just waiting to go to lunch. And I saw it pop up that they were going to have auditions for, or actually have an application process for the Titans job. So later that night, I put together everything I needed to do. I filled it out. We waited a little while, and I think they had several hundred to start with, and then narrowed it down to 21 semifinalists. They went from 21 where we auditioned, and I was the first out of the 21. So they did a Monday and Tuesday, and I was the very first one out of the gate. And I feel like I did everything I possibly could have done. It went really, really well. Ultimately, when the auditions were complete, we had to wait till they first told us they were going to narrow it to a top 5, and it ended up being a top 6. And so I don't know if that was just a logistical thing that sort of changed, but they got it down to the top 6. And those top 6 were put into a fan vote. We had up until Saturday of that week to vote. And it was really difficult because I don't like begging and asking for votes. And it's the first time I've ever been through something like that. But my community certainly didn't mind asking. And I don't know what the vote totals were, but I know I did well, because I had so many people, not only here in Tennessee, but all over the place that I've worked with that supported me, from high school students to teachers to friends to media folks. And it was just an amazing process. And I really believed up until the day before they made the announcement that I had a legitimate shot at winning the contest. And so if you'll give me just a second to finish that story, Matt Rogers, of course, won the contest and is the Titans public address announcer now. But through every level of the competition, they had notified us that they were going to call us and give us the result of going into the next round. And they did that because it was COVID time, and they were recording our reactions on Zoom, and they were putting together videos. It was great marketing by the team. And so we knew that if they were going to release the winner at 9:00 on Wednesday morning, that they would have to record on Monday and Tuesday all of the information about releasing the winner. And so as Sunday passed, I didn't worry that I didn't get called. And then on Monday, it got a little bit more nervous because I still didn't hear anything. And I got a call on Tuesday morning about 11:00, about 22 hours before they made the announcement, from David at the Titans, who told me the results of the contest. And I did not know that Matt was the winner, although that's what a lot of us suspected. And so I had to wait out until the next day. The hardest day was Tuesday, because everywhere I went, everybody was asking and telling me good luck and telling me they couldn't wait till tomorrow. And I was the only one who knew. And I knew that it was already over. And the hardest day was Tuesday and keeping it all together. And the biggest thing I can tell you is an amazing experience. You never know what doors it may open. And it wasn't tragic. It was just a disappointment. And in
Yeah.
life, there's a big difference between disappointment and tragedy. And it's okay to be disappointed. And it's okay to be happy for others and see them succeed. And it's also okay to look at yourself and say, what could I have done different and maybe done a little better? And so hopefully if that time ever comes again, I'll learn some good lessons that I can take, and you never know what those next opportunities will be. And so thank you for allowing me to share about that process a little bit.
Well, as I said, thank you again for taking time out of your Wednesday afternoon to do this.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the show, and I appreciate what you do. I'm just now launching a little bit into podcasting, and it's tough when
It
you're,
is.
working a job and doing everything you have to do to get everything set up to do it. It's a hard process to get that started, and we're just in the draft stages of that. But my podcast is more about leadership and telling good news stories, not necessarily about sports. But I appreciate what you do and the intro that you put together, and everything that you do here is really good, and I appreciate the hard work that you put into it.
Well, I've been at this almost 2 years now.
Well, you got a little head start on me, so I feel like if it's photography, I got a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. When it comes to podcasting, I'm learning my way,
Like,
and
what am I doing right here?
yeah, it's a little tough, and it's also a big competition because everybody's got a podcast now, and
Yeah.
you don't want to be the same thing that everybody else is, and it's hard to find that niche. And I feel like maybe we can do that, but it's just going to take some time to set it up right and make sure that we get all of our permissions done correctly, cover our copyrights, and also make sure that we get quality guests on the show. And so I'm looking forward to that, but I'm taking it slow because a podcast isn't my main source of income. It's just something cool
Yeah.
and fun to do on the side.
Well, I want to say this for the third time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope I can do it again sometime in the future. And with the number of guests that you've had on, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be able to be on with you.
Well, everybody, that was Kris Freeman. And as I always say, stay classy and tighten up.